Okay, so welcome everyone to the Vermont Yankee Nuclear Decommissioning Citizen Advisory Panel for December 11th, 2023. It's a busy agenda tonight, so thank you for coming, members of the public and panelists themselves. My name is Lissa Weinmann. I am the acting chair for tonight's meeting. For those of you who are not aware, our chair for 2023, Steve Skibniowski, passed away last month. I don't know exactly what date it was, but unfortunately, he's left us and the world, and we're very sorry to see him go. He was a great person. He was struggling with cancer and succumbed. I think he worked at the plant for some 30 years or more. So thank you, Steve Skibniowski, for all your service over the years, and we will miss you very much. The agenda is packed tonight. We hope to finish by 9 p.m. We're not sure that we have quorum, but I would like to now see if anybody has any adjustments to this agenda before we do a roll call. I think you know that in order to speak, you can raise your hand in the chat function. If anybody needs us to go over any of the housekeeping details in terms of how you can be recognized, let us know now. And if there are no amendments to the agenda, we're going to proceed as per the agenda on the screen right now. Hearing none, we're going to move to our state nuclear engineer, Tony Lashinsky. He's going to call out the panelists' names and ask you to identify yourself. So if you could do that, that would be great. And I'll start myself, Lissa Weinmann. I'm a citizen appointee by former Senate Pro Tem Chair Becca Ballant. Who's next?
Okay, well, we've had a couple of panelists join, so we have quorum, but
Great.
we'll just run through the rest of the panelists alphabetically. So let's start with Todd Amato, who just joined. Todd, it looks like you're on mute right now, so please unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Todd Amato from Vernon.
Okay. Next we have, I know Maddie Arms is not here, but the person after that, Chris Campany.
Hi, Chris Campany, Executive Director, Wyndham Regional Commission.
Okay, and I know Tricia Coppolino is unavailable this evening. So next person up is Corey Daniels.
Good evening, Corey Daniels with NorthStar. I'm the ISPSD Senior Manager.
Okay, and moving right along, David Eastman.
David Eastman, I'm here. Guilford, citizen appointee of the House.
Okay, next person is Bill Irwin.
Good evening, Bill Irwin. I work for the Vermont Department of Health, and I represent the Agency of Human Services.
Okay, and next is Bob Leach.
Yeah, Bob Leach from Brattleboro, my Yankee employee for almost 30 years and appointed by the governor.
Okay, next person is Brett Long.
Evening, I'm Brett Long. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the Vermont Department of Economic Development, and I'm here as the representative for the Agency of Commerce and Community Development.
Okay, is Mark McDonald here? Okay, next person is David Pearson.
Good evening. Yep. Good evening, David Pearson with NorthStar.
Okay. You may have to mute some microphones there when I know two of you are in the same room. Okay. Next person, Marvin Resnikov.
I am Marvin Resnikov. I'm a physicist from Brattleboro, and I'm also on the board of the Sierra Club.
Okay. Laura Sibilia. Okay, and last person is Commissioner Tierney, who just emailed me to say that she needs the link for tonight's meeting. So it was kind of hard for me to do while I'm roll call. Okay, here she comes now. So thank you, Eric, for forwarding the link. Okay, so we should have Commissioner Tierney joining in just a few. There she is. Okay.
Great. Hello, Commissioner Tierney.
Hi there.
Good to see you. All right. So we've done our roll call. We do have quorum, thankfully. We've already asked, but I'll ask again if anybody has any adjustments, amendments to the agenda as it stands. Otherwise, we're going to proceed. It's a very full agenda tonight, so we want to get through it by 9 p.m. if we can. Therefore, the next item on the agenda would be the review and approval of September 18th, our last panel meeting minutes. Do I see a motion to approve those minutes?
Actually, before we get to that, there are 3 corrections that have been brought to my attention that we need to address.
Okay.
Okay, so fortunately, they are in the same area. On page 6, line 14, the question started with with mention of National Academy of Sciences. However, the question itself was really directed towards some Nuclear Regulatory Commission requirements. So this is just a change I did not catch, unfortunately. So on line 14, we need to replace National Academy of Sciences with Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
I don't see that on the screen, Tony. Are you sharing that right now? Or?
Oh, my apologies. I did not scroll up to the page.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Hold on. Yeah, so right here.
I see.
Okay. Also, a little bit further down on this page, this was actually a comment that came in on the annual report using language from minutes from the last meeting. On line 20, there is a note where it is stated that there is still about a 30-foot margin to on-site flooding. I knew what this is a discussion of our presentation from Corey Daniels. I knew what he meant by that, but apparently that is confusing some people. What it meant was that basically the height of the groundwater, height of the river at that point was still 30 feet below grade at Vermont Yankee site. So I do not know if we want to change anything there, but I will. I'll certainly entertain a change in text at line 20 or 21 if anyone has a suggestion for a change there.
There was still about a 30-foot margin. I think it's okay the way it is, frankly.
Okay.
Does anybody disagree? And we're going to change the National Academy of Science on line 14 to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Tony, I will offer this was clarified to the person who asked the question as well in a later email and discussion and question. So I think the information stands as Lissa says is accepted.
Okay. Okay, I am fine with that. And last item, moving up to page 8. This will go, I think this will go pretty fast. On line 26, again, based on some of this wording was used in the annual report summary for the last meeting, but there is there was a request to delete the phrase at the end of line 26 while no direct answer was provided. So we would delete that and begin that sentence with Ms. Darling noted that if the panel website, so on and so forth. Is there any objection to that, or does someone wish to do something different?
I think that's fine, Tony.
Okay. Okay. So those are the only changes that have been identified. I don't know if anyone else has reviewed the minutes and has any further changes to ask, to request.
I actually think that I might have made a change or two, but I did it on the annual report because I was so
okay.
But let's just let it wasn't anything that was earth-shattering. So let's just let it stand, and we can change it on the annual report as needed.
Okay. Okay, very good.
Okay, so do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
A second.
Okay, so let's just do a voice. All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
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 Anybody abstaining? Okay, minutes are approved. Let's go on to, I keep changing my screen here, so just give me a minute. So next up, we have a report from Dr. Bill Irwin at the Vermont Department of Health regarding the department's role in radiological monitoring during decommissioning. And that will be followed by a report on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's role in terms of radiological monitoring during decommissioning. So I would turn the screen over to Dr. Irwin. Thank you very much, Dr. Irwin, for...
If I can hold for just 1 second, it looks like Commissioner Tierney. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. June, I thought you were raising your hand. My apologies.
No, my apologies. I was just adjusting my lighting. It's blinding me a little.
Okay.
So my apologies.
Okay.
Great.
And Tony, you'll just change pages when I ask?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, you can go to the next page. First, some historical perspective. A lot of you know that the health department has been actively conducting environmental surveillance around Vermont Yankee. And this has actually occurred since before what's called initial criticality. That's bringing the reactor to a critical condition back in 1972. Between 1970 and 1972, we worked to develop background radiation levels before there was the radiation from the physical plant. And we have produced annual environmental surveillance reports since that year, with the exception of a couple of years, which I'll talk about in a moment. The paper versions of the report, which were all that we had in those early days, were distributed to Vermont libraries and I believe they still are there at, for example, the Vernon Library, as well as the State Library in Montpelier. Electronic versions were first published in 2006, and the latest that we have is from 2020. There's a link there where you can find all of those that have been published electronically. And if anyone has questions about years before that, I have copies of the paper reports. Next slide. So I mentioned that we hadn't done a report for a couple of years, and those were the 2 years of COVID, 20 and 21 through 22. As all of you know, of course, the world suffered immensely from COVID-19, especially in the early stages when there was no vaccine, and then in the later stages when variants actually caused more illness and more mortality. I was the lead for the health department at the State Emergency Operations Center, working to develop the initial testing and then later moved to initial vaccinations. And our district office representative in Brattleboro, who did all the sampling, transitioned to giving tests in Brattleboro and other areas, as well as vaccinations when we got those. And our public health laboratory essentially did nothing but COVID-19 related tests unless they were for emergency purposes. And our scientist who works with me in publishing the reports was transferred to the public health laboratory to work there during COVID. And this is just a graph of the number of cases as that occurred. As we were in lockdown, cases were quite low, but the Omicron variant in 1921 and 22 really were quite devastating in a number of different ways. But they kept us from being able to do some of the surveillance that we normally like to do. Next slide, please. What we have started again in 2022, slowly, gradually, we went back to collecting water and then went to collecting air. And then we were able to get those analyzed at the laboratory. And now we're getting reports. And the reports are run through a calendar that starts with the collection in the field, shipment to the laboratory, ascensioning in the laboratory, and then analysis by the lab on instruments, and then publication of the raw data. Finally, after the year is over, we publish a report for all of the findings. Over the years, we have had some findings. For example, we had findings whereby some radioactive contamination was found in the sediments in the river, and these were investigated. We found some other indications in certain locations and jointly investigated. And almost always it was a collaborative effort with Vermont Yankee to, hang on a second, I'm at my fire department because power's out in our town. I'm going to ask, could you just close that door? Thank you. And the work has always found the cause of the findings, but none of the findings from our environmental sampling lead to or could lead to any sort of dose to people, even if they were to consume fish, water directly from the Connecticut River, to live on site there or very close to the site, etc. So our environmental sampling has for more than 5 decades actually verified that there's been very limited pollution of the environment and none that would lead to doses to the public. Next slide, please. So this is a list of all of the things that we sampled over the years. You can see we do a lot of water samples from the river, from homes, from the public water supply. We also gather milk from 2 Vernon farms, and we collect air at 8 different air sampling stations around Vermont Yankee. The sediments and fish samples have not been collected since the end of operations because of changes at the plant relative to environmental monitoring overall. Next slide, please. Throughout all of the COVID interruption, one form of assessment continued throughout, and that was the monitoring of gamma radiation around the nuclear power plant and the local area of Vernon, and then for background purposes, areas outside of Vernon in Brattleboro, Wilmington, Dummerston, and Guilford. And we would use the dosimetry results and those background locations where unaffected by the plant and compare the background to measurements at the plant site boundary. And we are able to determine compliance with the department's regulations for discharges and effluents from the plant, as well as this direct gamma radiation. For anyone that's followed the plant over the decades, primarily the issues have been 1, of dose from the direct gamma radiation, and 2, of these occasional incidents where there were contaminants found in the environment where they shouldn't have been. And most people that have been here for 10 years or so are especially familiar, or 15 years or so, especially familiar with a significant leak of reactor coolant from the plant out of the condensate system near the advanced off-gas building that was called the tritium leak, though while we were following tritium, it was really the other radionuclides from the leak that were causing us and the plant and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission the greater levels of concern, because those are more harmful to both the environment and public health than is the tritium. Next slide, please. So I mentioned our regulations. We were established before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was established. And for that reason, we've always had a relationship with the owners of the nuclear power plant, Vermont Yankee, to have state independent oversight and to actually have limits on various components of discharge. During operations, we had 5 primary pathways that we looked at. They were the 3 that you see here: liquid effluents, radioactive particulates in air, and direct gamma radiation. We also, during operations, evaluated the amount of radioactive iodine and the amount of radioactive gases that were emitted. After the plant stopped operating, and after some relatively short months of radioactive decay, those 2 final elements, specifically radioiodines and radioactive gases, were no longer being released from the plant due to the nature of those radioactive materials and the plant operations. With that, we had a total of 15 millirem worth of radiation dose that we actively continue to evaluate. And those 15 millirem per year were established as a limit that all parties would agree to in the decommissioning memorandum of understanding between the state of Vermont and NorthStar. And that is the set of limits that we would expect to use after the site is released for unrestricted use by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. From all of our measurements during the decommissioning, we have not had measurements in excess of that 15 millirem per year. And if you go to the next slide, please. I showed you a map of the locations where the dosimeters are located. And if you go to the 2020 report that is online, you can see those maps in your computer screen or whatever you use. If you get a paper copy, you can look at them there as well. And you can see our calculation of the radiation levels around the plant. In 2020, that was the first one of the years that the reactor was shut down, and it was under early stages of decommissioning. They were just starting to work on the reactor vessel internals and had removed the nuclear fuel to the independent spent fuel storage installation. And for that year, our dosimeters, we reported in 2020 that the radiation levels from direct gamma were between 0 millirem above background and a maximum of 6.7 millirem per year above background. And we get doses from air and water discharges, and all of those added together for all of the year are much less than 1 millirem per year. We anticipate, unless there's something very, very unanticipated at all, likely to occur, that the 15 millirem per year is likely to not be exceeded after the site is released for unrestricted use by the NRC and during the rest of the decommissioning. That 15 millirem per year is important to us because it is 10 millirem per year less than the NRC limit for nuclear power plants, which itself is protective of the environment and public health. But it's always appropriate when you can to work towards lowest amounts that you can achieve. And so we're glad to have not just those kinds of radiation levels being measured as low as reasonably achievable, but also that our limits are lower too. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we've continued over the year through today. There are dosimeters in all those locations that I mentioned and showed the map from. The dose from all of those, and we've also been gathering samples of air and of water from the river and in wells as well as in the reservoir in Brattleboro to evaluate the doses from air particulates, liquid effluents, and gamma radiation. And the air particulates and liquid effluents still remain less than 1 millirem per year through the current year where we've been getting those samples after COVID, and that's the year 2023. And combined with the doses from the direct gamma radiation, you can see there below, 2021, the exposure rate was 8 milliroentgen per year, and we consider a milliroentgen equivalent to a millirem, despite the fact that it is perhaps a little simplification of the science to say so. And for 2022, we consider the 9 milliroentgen per year to be less than 9 millirem per year for members of the public. Next slide, please. So the measurements that I just referred to are ongoing. We expect that we'll publish a 2023 report sometime in 2024 after we get all of the laboratory results. Of course, we haven't finished 2023 yet. But other activities that we've been engaged in, we have twice monthly calls with NorthStar, the Agency of Natural Resources, and the Department of Public Safety. We, at least quarterly, visit the site to observe progress, and those are the times that I exchange radiation dosimeters. We also review and distribute the receipts for low-level radioactive waste shipping notices. By our regulations, any shipments in Vermont have to be provided to the health department for acknowledgement. We also train the Vermont Hazardous Materials Response Team, the VDH Radiological Health Staff, and the VDH Public Health Lab twice annually on Vermont Yankee emergency response. We just had our last training in November. This image here is an image I was allowed to take by NorthStar, who was accompanying me on a tour. This is the reactor building when you're looking north from what was the advanced off-gas building. It's near the area where the so-called tritium leak had occurred, and you can see soils there being excavated down below grade and waiting sampling for potential release or disposition according to NRC review of the laboratory analyses, or the NorthStar review of those analyses, and then review of those reports by the NRC. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, by law, we ask all of those who transport radioactive materials through the state to notify us. NorthStar does that very effectively. We're very happy with that process. These are the results here. In 2022, there were 126 shipments and 7,480 curies of radioactivity, a very significant amount of radioactive material. And the bulk of that was actually in one shipment, where you can see that one that occurred around March 30th of 2022, where it was about 7,290 curies. That was from the reactor vessel internals. Next slide, please. So these are 2023 shipments, and similarly, we had mostly pretty low-level activity for the so far 222 shipments. You can see we're nowhere near the nearly 8,000 curies shipped in 2022, only about 48 curies shipped in 2023 as of Thanksgiving. And large fraction of that you can see is that one, again, back in the May timeframe, around May 1st, where 23.3 curies were shipped at one time. Next slide, please. So we're very aware of the fact that this has been a very well managed decommissioning, the decontamination and disassembly of structures, systems, and components. I've had the opportunity to witness a great deal of it. The NRC has as well, and has been inspecting, and we've been hearing about those inspections. And we are aware of the disposals. We see the history there, but we also know that there's a history in nuclear power plant decommissionings that during the last couple of years, as they begin to dig into the earth around buildings, especially where water flows and comes up against those buildings and is somewhat dammed up rather than allowed to pass around them, and that there are some pools of liquid or solids that have become contaminated with radioactivity. So we'll be very anxious to see the results of the work that takes place in these last 2 years as the buildings are taken down to below grade, and the monitoring wells might show some disturbances of the groundwater, and those might indicate some sort of activity in the groundwater, but we hope it's not. As someone lucky enough to live here for a long time, much of which has been with Vermont Yankee operating, I've known this to be a plant that operated very professionally, and I hope that the rest of the decommissioning goes that same way. So that, next slide, please. We can have that which it looked like back in 1970, that image on the right, from where we were just a few years ago, that image on the left. And I thank you very much, and we'll take questions later.
Thank you so much, Bill. That was a very thorough presentation. We really appreciate it. Now, it's important to realize that the Department of Health's work in terms of radiological monitoring ends at the fence line of Vermont Yankee. So now we're going to hear from two representatives of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, who will give an overview of radiological monitoring at the site itself within the fence line, and describe that to you. And with that, I'd like to introduce Anthony Dimitriadis and Steve Hammann, both from NRC Region 1 office. Welcome, Anthony and Steve. You can proceed.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Anthony Dimitriadis. I'm the branch chief responsible for oversight of Vermont Yankee, and with me I have Steve Hammann, who is the senior health physicist, and he's the lead inspector for Vermont Yankee, as he has been for at least 4 or 5 years. So we'll be talking a little bit about our inspection program, and we will get into a little bit of the monitoring, how we process issues of concern, how we process violations, how we do public engagement, and notification of the public of our inspection results. Thank you for the invitation to do this. I have been with the NRC for about 32 years, and I've been doing decommissioning for almost that long. We have 14 slides to go over. Next slide, please. So we're going to touch a little bit about some of the insights based on our inspections at 6 different sites and 7 plants. We will also go over some of the challenges as well as some of the successes. Additionally, we will briefly cover the transition that a plant goes through when it shuts down for the final time as it enters into either a safe store or active decommissioning mode, as Vermont Yankee is. We'll cover some of the findings, that is, violations at some of the facilities. And finally, we will cover inspections specific to Vermont Yankee. Next slide, please. So when reactors are operating, we, the NRC, we use what's called the reactor oversight process, or the ROP, to assess the licensee's performance. This process is described in one of our very many inspection manual chapters, mainly IMC 0305. Basically, we assess the licensee's performance using 2 things: inspections and performance indicators. There are 17 of those. We do that because it's a complex process. There are many things happening during the run of when a reactor is operating. There's many things to consider, and so we utilize a very complex process to assess their performance. So when a reactor site permanently ceases operation and the licensee verifies removal of the fuel from the reactor vessel, the vessel is a big steel pot, basically. It's very robust. We, the NRC, we cease the use of the ROP, and we transition our oversight of the licensee's performance into what we call the traditional enforcement process. What that means is we use the enforcement policy and the enforcement manual, 2 different documents. Licensees who have permanently shut down reactor sites may elect to either place the site in short, medium, or long-term storage called safe store, or 2, enter active decommissioning. And one thing to remember, the licensee that runs and operates the plant or shuts down is allowed up to 60 years to complete the decommissioning activities. Next slide, please. So our inspection program, as you can see, there's a picture of Steve there, right there, directly doing his work. So our inspections involve communication, coordination, planning, scheduling, conference calls, plant walkdowns, interviews, and review of procedures and records. Our folks use the inspection manual chapter 2561. You can see that right there. It's the first bullet on the slide, which outlines our inspection program. Basically, our inspectors have unfettered access to the facility. The inspections are multidisciplinary and intrusive. When I say multidisciplinary, while Steve is an expert in radiation protection, he might bring someone, and he did early on, for fire protection. We bring folks who specialize in security and things of that sort. Our procedures have our inspectors look at the licensee's procedures, logs, and records, which are reviewed before, during, and after our on-site visits. And inspections can involve one inspector or multiple inspectors. The inspection program includes many items such as spent fuel pool maintenance, as I said earlier, fire protection, occupational radiation exposure for radiation workers, that is, in radiation areas, and radioactive waste treatment and effluent and environmental monitoring. Next slide, please. So some of the insights that we've seen at various sites, by the way, Region 1 leads the nation and probably the world, our office, in overseeing the decommissioning of multiple sites, basically 6 sites, 9 plants that are decommissioning. We're seeing sites that are effectively planning the work and working their plans. As you can imagine, there are a million different details involved in deconstructing a reactor and ensuring that it's done safely. And that's basically the job of what Corey Daniels directs in this case. Sites are doing this effectively, and as a result of external forces involved with supplies, transportation, and labor, they make numerous adjustments. This has an effect on schedules, but it's impressive how such adjustments have not affected the long-term schedule in a significant manner. We're seeing a difference in cultures. We're seeing a vast difference in culture from site to site. All sites retained a portion of their plant employees. For example, like Tom Silko, who knows a lot about the plant, does a really good job at what he does, which has served them well due to the familiarity of the plant. The sites have also had to supplement the on-site staffing with employees from local communities. This has resulted in a number of employees that did not emerge from a nuclear background and therefore may not have been previously indoctrinated into the very low threshold safety culture that comes from working at a nuclear site. Therefore, we are seeing some differences from site to site. We haven't seen that at Vermont Yankee, but we've seen it at other sites that Region 1 is responsible for. The variety of cultures has also resulted in how each site has adopted or embraced their corrective action program. As you know, the NRC expects its licensees to identify and correct problems and use the corrective action program as essential. Overall, our licensees have effectively used the corrective action program, and continued adherence and vigilance is a key to future success. Next slide, please. Now I'll go over some of the challenges. We have seen and heard some of these, and should not be confused with violations, although some do overlap with that. Some of the challenges associated with decommissioning a reactor site involve fires that occur during welding or cutting and begin due to combustible material being left in the area adjacent to where that's being done, or fire rounds not being done adequately or not done at all. We've seen security deficiencies that involve the adequate implementation of Part 37 requirements, and safety culture issues where corrective actions are not initiated due to a lack of awareness of how low level the threshold is expected at a nuclear facility. Now, and one other thing that we've seen is that our stakeholders, perhaps not near Vermont Yankee, but at other sites, may not be fully aware of the risks that we deal with, and that is especially for effluent releases that would translate to a maximum of less than 1 millirem of dose, when the sum of all natural radiation doses to the public per year is 620 millirem. And I think the less than 1 millirem, I think in the earlier presentation. Bill Irwin kind of covered that a little bit for 1 year. Next slide, please. Now we'll talk a little bit about how the NRC processes issues of concern that may result in a violation and how that process works. The enforcement process begins with the identification of violations either through NRC inspections, investigations, a licensee report, or a substantiation of an allegation. When an inspector identifies or becomes aware of an issue of concern, we process that issue to determine if there's an associated violation. In the decommissioning program, we do not follow the ROP, like I said earlier in my presentation. We implement what we call the traditional enforcement program, and that process follows our enforcement policy, as you can see the cover of that policy on the slide. If the issue is a violation, then we do use the enforcement policy, and we also use what we call the enforcement manual. The enforcement policy is about 94 pages, and the enforcement manual is much more detailed, and it's like 430 pages for that. The NRC staff evaluates a violation severity level through consideration of 4 factors. If there's actual safety security consequences, if there's potential safety security consequence, the impact to the NRC's regulatory process, and if there's a willfulness associated with that. Next slide, please. Licensees are typically aware that the NRC staff is evaluating a potential violation during the course of an inspection or inspection period based on the information being reviewed and the questions that our inspectors ask of the licensee staff. The NRC staff formally informs the licensee of potential violations during the inspection exit meeting. The public is made aware of violations when the NRC staff issues the inspection report, which is typically within 30 or 45 days of the exit meeting, depending on if it's a single inspector or 2, or if it's a team report involving more than 3 or more. Our enforcement actions and licensees' responses are normally made publicly available for inspection by the public. Occasionally, some security-related information and certain other information, such as, for example, medical records, will not be made available to the public. And sometimes we also issue press releases when either an order or a civil penalty is issued at the same time as the notice of violation. And our NRC Office of Public Affairs is responsible for making final decisions as to whether a press release would be issued. If we identify that a licensee has declining performance where there are numerous violations, we would increase our inspection activities. Next slide, please. So to illustrate how the process, how we process violations, I've chosen 2 or 3 violations to talk about. Number 1, lack of surveys, where the site staff sometimes attempt to make decisions without relevant information on actual conditions on the ground. There was, for example, a roll-up door violation, a failure to survey a roll-up door, not at Vermont Yankee, at another site, where a severity level 4 violation, a non-cited violation, was identified, 10 CFR 20.1406, where the licensee failed to develop and implement a radiation protection program to minimize the potential introduction of residual radioactivity into the site protection against ionizing radiation. So what does that mean? Basically, the licensee did not have an adequate procedure for engineering controls to ensure that airflow would not escape the equipment hatch during radiological work as described in the licensee's engineering change. This violation was assessed as a severity level 4 for a number of reasons, and namely because no aggressive work was being conducted, and so the licensee had also entered the issue into its corrective action program. So that wasn't something that actually happened, but it could have happened, so we issued a violation for that. Did not happen in Vermont Yankee, just trying to establish some ideas about how we do violations. So we've also seen some challenges that we are seeing, fires due to hot work. Fires, we've seen a number of violations not at Vermont Yankee, at another site where the fire watch person had left their station too early or were not present when the hot work was still active, or they failed to remove combustible materials in the area where the hot work was being done, or they didn't follow the procedures and didn't remove certain equipment that could cause a fire. So, and then there were certain security issues that have also emerged, which sometimes result in NRC violations, which we won't get into details for some of the security issues. Next slide, please. So some of the successes, sites have done a good job communicating with the NRC staff, such as sharing schedules and changes to the schedules. So I bring this up because Bill indicated about what we all went through, all of us, everybody here at this call and greater United States and the world. We went through the COVID issue where our staff continued to work. And I know for a fact that the sites continued to work to do the important work of decommissioning. And we had very good communication with the sites. So that was important. It seems like, it was that technology really helped us in that regard. Sites have made a significant progress in dismantling and deconstructing their respective sites. And there have been significant challenges, as I just talked about COVID-19, supply chain shortages, weather delays, changes in staffing, for example, due to people getting fatigued due to the added stress of COVID. So we've had that, and the shortage of radiation protection personnel to support certain activities. And lastly, the sites have shipped a lot of low-level radioactive waste to various sites, including at a site called WCS. So this involves the use of trains and trucks with appropriate labeling, marking, and communication of proper shipping papers. So that's detailed work that must be done properly. And this has been done successfully hundreds or thousands of times through the past 4 years, at least through my tenure during this branch, as long as I've had it since July 1st of 2019. Now I'll turn it over to Steve Hammann. He'll talk a little bit about Vermont Yankee specifically.
Okay, next slide, Tony. Okay, so I'll speak a little bit more specifically about Vermont Yankee. Tony did kind of the overview. So I'll just run kind of through a little bit of a history of Vermont Yankee's decommissioning and the phases they were in and what our focuses were. So January 2015, when they shut down, they went into what we refer to as post-operation transition phase. During that time, we left a resident inspector in place for 6 months. That was Sarah Rich. So we had someone on site every day. During that time, I made several trips up to familiarize myself with the site. During that time, the focus of the inspections is basically when a plant first shuts down, there's a lot of changes to organization and staffing and stuff like that. So that's part of the focus. And then they're performing modifications to the plant. They're doing a lot of system abandonments, just a lot of systems that are no longer necessary because they don't have an operating reactor. So that's part of the focus. And then, of course, all the fuel has been taken out of the reactor, put into the spent fuel pool. So spent fuel pool safety was the other probably main focus. Although, as Tony mentioned, all of our core inspection procedures do get completed every single year, but those are the ones that were the focus when they're in post-operation transition phase. Starting into the second year in 2016, in the second quarter, we said they were out of the post-operation phase and into safe store. During the safe store period, really the main focus is going to be spent fuel pool safety. If they still have spent fuel assemblies in the pool, which they did in 2016. So that was pretty much the main focus. But again, we always keep an eye on what other activities are going on site. In 2018, they started their spent fuel loading campaign, getting all the fuel out of the pool and onto their SSC pad. So our SSC inspectors were there. I think they were there for like 3 or 4 separate inspections during that period. So a lot of SSC inspections. And rolling into 2019, that's when the license was transferred to NorthStar, and they went into active decommissioning. So when they go into active decommissioning, our frequency of the inspections goes up considerably. Just to say a word about frequency, it has to do with what activities are taking place on site, and it has to do with the performance of the licensee. So if there's a lot of activities that are of pretty high radiological risk, we're there more often, and again, dependent on the performance of the licensee, that will affect how often we go as well. So, for instance, the first year they were in active decommissioning, I was there once every 5 weeks for the first year. Rolling into the second year, I cut it back just a little bit. I was there twice a quarter on site. And then when COVID rolled around, I started going once every 2 months. And there was really good performance by NorthStar. So once the COVID restrictions were lifted, I still kept the inspections at on-site inspections at once every 2 months. Next slide, please, Tony. All right. And there's the picture on the right there. That's a couple of our other newer decommissioned inspectors. We kind of used Vermont Yankee as a little bit of a training ground for some of our newer decommissioned inspectors. So I had a lot of them come up over the past 4 years, so they can see some active decommissioning going on. So how the NRC inspects. Let me start with communications. It's key for us to keep, because we don't have a resident inspector on site all the time anymore. It's really key for us to have good communication, so we know what is going on during the site all the time. So basically, they send me every single day a photo log of work being done, right? So, I get a visual of all sorts of work that's going on. They send me a weekly plan of the week, so I get to see what their schedule is and exactly what activities they have planned for that week. We have bi-weekly set calls with the site, with site management and personnel, and then between myself and our project managers at headquarters are also on the call. So, and besides those set calls, very often either I'm calling them and asking questions, or they're calling me, letting me know that there's something that they think I should be aware of. One of the things that I know they can tell you that I've told them a number of times is, nobody likes to be surprised, right? I don't want to be surprised. They don't want to be surprised. So, whenever anything unusual happens, they should give me a call, and they've been very good about that. Other than that, the on-site inspections are heavily leaning towards observations and interviews. So I like to get out in the field a lot and actually watch the workers doing their jobs, and then getting to talk to them about what it is that they're doing and any issues they may be having. I especially like to watch the radius protection folks and see them doing the job coverage, seeing that they have the correct radiological controls in place, watch them doing surveys, instrument calibrations, all sorts of stuff. I do walk downs all outside the plant and inside all the buildings, taking a look to see what work has been done, what work is ongoing, and the physical condition of the buildings and systems and components. And then finally, a documentation review. I review programs, procedures, reports that they issue, internal audits. There is a document list attached to every report that I put out that basically shows all the documents I've reviewed. Excuse me. Next slide, Tony. Okay, the core radiological inspection procedures that we use. All right. 83750 is occupational radiation exposure. And again, I have the basically objectives written down there. Ensure adequate protection of the worker health and safety, and evaluate whether they are adequately identifying any problems and are able to fix them. 84750, which is waste treatment, effluent, environmental monitoring. There is no longer any waste treatment at Vermont Yankee. So basically, the discharges of materials are adequately qualified and evaluated from all the established release points, and ensure that the environmental monitoring program is effectively implemented. And 86750, which is waste management and transportation of radioactive materials. So of these three, 83750, occupational radiation exposure, and 86750, which is waste management and transportation, I look at some aspects of those every single time I'm on site. So once every 2 months, when I'm on site, I will actively make sure that I look at certain aspects of those. I want to ensure that I know everything that's going on site, what the radiological conditions of the site are, the radiological conditions of the work being performed, what controls are in place by NorthStar for the work that's being performed. The NRC does not routinely perform our own monitoring. However, when a site is in decommissioning, we will perform confirmatory surveys. So, for instance, their cooling tower basins, the demolition of the cooling towers, they surveyed inside the basins, and then they wanted to fill them back in. So the NRC uses a contractor, Oak Ridge Associated Universities. So we hire them. They come in and they performed confirmatory surveys of the cooling tower basin. And as we move forward in the project and they get farther along, when buildings are removed and they have performed what they're telling us are their final surveys, there will be extensive confirmatory surveys performed by the NRC. We have our contractors do it. And there are some exceptions. Every once in a while, like for instance, they have a interim off-gas trench out by where their main stack used to be, and they had surveyed that and they wanted to fill that back in. The project managers and myself discussed it, and we decided, because it was a rather small trench and it was what we refer to as a class 3 area, that we would not have our contractors come out and do a formal confirmatory survey. But I did take instrumentation and go into the trench myself and performed my own survey to ensure that I was not going to find any readings above background. So we do some surveys like that ourselves along the way. So that's basically what we look at in terms of our radiological inspections. So I do know that there is going to be a question and answer session coming up soon. So we're here to answer any questions that you may have. And I believe that's it for our hours.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And we do on the agenda have time now for questions from panel members, starting with panel members regarding both presentations from Dr. Bill Irwin and from the representatives of the NRC. So let's see if there's some questions. Dave Eastman.
Sorry. So I'm curious as to sort of I'll call it the so-called tritium leak, and was wondering, sort of mostly my thinking is what ongoing monitoring might be going on based on that incident, and what, if anything, one would expect to find long-term from that incident. And I don't know whether that's who wants to take that, but I'll throw it out there.
Yeah, I can take that. So they did put in a series of monitoring wells after that happened, which are still active, and they do still draw samples from those wells and have them analyzed on a quarterly basis. I have accompanied them while they have drawn samples from the wells, and every year that gets reported out to us. I believe it's in a public report for effluents. And so as part of my inspection activities, I do look at that report and I do look at the results. They are still, I think out of all the monitoring wells they put in, there are 2 monitoring wells where they are still getting positive results for tritium. They are quite low. I think, I believe the last ones I saw were 1,100 picocuries per liter and 1,300 picocuries per liter. To put that in perspective, the EPA drinking water limit is 30,000 picocuries per liter. So really there's very minimal activity that they are seeing from 2 of the wells for right now. But yes, they will continue monitoring that throughout their decommissioning.
Is it likely to get disrupted more and release more, and particularly the non tritium isotopes, I would think would be the bigger concern here?
Yeah, they're not getting any hits at all from other than tritium. That's all they're finding right now.
And just to put it in perspective, tritium is an isotope that is really one of the weakest isotopes around. It has a very weak beta emitter. Basically, the beta emitter, the energy is between 7 keV and 18 keV, usually on average about 7, which basically means that if it hits your epidermis, it can't penetrate it. So it's one of the weakest, emitters that we know of, really. But it has a half-life of 12 years, and so it'll be around for a little while. And so, but it's relatively on a scale of other isotopes, it's one of the weakest, if not the weakest. Bill, Irwin, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I would only agree with your comments there. And the NRC has jurisdiction on site. They look at the data there. We monitor the river upstream and downstream. During the tritium leak at several points, there were measurements of tritium in the river, but they dissipated the tritium plume years ago now, and we've not seen anything in the river since.
In the river, were you only looking at the tritium, or were you looking for other isotopes?
Yeah, we look at all isotopes in all of our samples.
I thought so. I just wanted to.
Yeah.
For reasons that Anthony mentioned, I didn't want to just focus on tritium, and make sure that we're covering and that the public is aware of the lack of findings of the others, as well as tritium.
Yeah, right. That is a good point. And yes, they do, as Bill mentioned, not just what the state monitors, but the site as well. They don't, they monitor for other isotopes as well.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, I had the question as to whether the site is likely to be redevelopable or redeveloped, especially given the fact that there's still casks there, as I understand it.
So from a regulatory perspective, The casks will be there until they have an ultimate home, and that is based on DOE's, not NRC's jurisdiction, but DOE's work on where that might be. But the rest of the land, as Steve indicated earlier, we've done a lot of decommissioning work in the 90s. In fact, Region 1 led the way because, to be honest, we had the oldest plants and they decommissioned. Maine Yankee, as you know, Connecticut Yankee and Yankee Row. And so what's left is the ISFA pad. The rest of the areas, when all the buildings are down and the licensee wants to release it and do something with the land, either sell it or do something, they have to do final status surveys. The NRC ensures that we do what we call comparative surveys, right? So we do confirmatory surveys so that whatever the licensee, if they take soil samples or gamma surveys, our folks are right along with them to compare note to see if we get a consistent result. And so we would do confirmatory surveys. And after that, if they are consistent, whatever land that a licensee wants to have unrestricted release, we would do that. What they do privately, that's really not under our jurisdiction, as you might imagine. Steve, did you want to add anything?
No, I mean, exactly as you said, once we release it from the license, then, it's not our concern anymore.
And have some of these other sites been redeveloped?
I've been to Maine Yankee and Connecticut Yankee and Yankee Row. The answer is no. I think those states and there's been agreements where they wanted to keep it as parks or whatever. Now, let me just go back to that. When we say that they want to release it for unrestricted use, it's important what Bill sort of indicated about the 15 milligram. The dose limit, the DCGLs, the derived concentration limits, they are guideline levels. They are set such that if the site were to sell the land after it's unrestricted, they're so low that you could do whatever it is that you want, including you could even put a daycare center there. That's how restrictive they are. The NRC and EPA limit is 25 millirem, but Vermont is actually lower than that. It's actually 15 millirem. So it's very low.
Thank you.
Sure.
Tony, I can't see if anybody's got their hand up from my perch. So does anybody have their hand up? Tony? If not, I'm going to ask a few questions. For Dr. Irwin, I noticed in your presentation that there was some dosimeter readings that in 2021 and 2022 that were reading 8 one year, 9 the next for millirem levels above background radiation. What was that from? To what would you attribute those increased levels?
Well, the facts are that the site is small. The distance from the independent spent fuel storage installation is relatively short, and there's a lot of radioactivity in those spent fuel casks. And that is very likely not only the source now, but likely to be the source for the future of those elevated readings above background.
And to follow up on that, since there's an elementary school there at the gate of the plant, very close to the ISFA, are there any concerns regarding the impact on particularly children who we know are more susceptible to lower levels of radiation?
So in health physics, we have always the basis that the younger the person, the more radio sensitive they are. And so we, in fact, have some of our greater concerns about the developing embryo or fetus in a pregnant woman. And then we have established public limits on the basis of a full lifetime of exposure from a child to advanced age. And that accounts for the possibility of developing any sort of disease from chronic exposures over that long lifetime. But these numbers that we're talking about here, 15 for the state of Vermont, 25 for the NRC, are so low that we would not expect any health effects from exposure at these values for an entire lifetime, even if the exposure started at birth. And of course, we don't expect that there's anyone that actually has those kinds of exposure values because it is just at these very isolated locations.
I see. And regarding the monitoring wells on site, so just to be clear, NorthStar is responsible for monitoring any radiological findings in the monitoring wells that are still on site. You mentioned that there were still some tritium readings at 2 of the wells, but I'm wondering how many wells are there on site that are being regularly monitored? And does the NRC play a role beyond just looking at what NorthStar itself is finding?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly how many there are. I mean, there were maybe a dozen or so wells that they had set up, and that they still monitor. The NRC's role, again, we do not do our own monitoring. It's really just part of the inspection process. So as I mentioned, for instance, I have accompanied them while they go out and pull samples themselves, to make sure that they're, following their own procedures and they're correctly, collecting samples. And every time very often I walk down the locations of the monitoring wells to make sure that they are in good physical condition and easily accessible. And then I review the results that they get. But again, NRC themselves, we do not do our own monitoring program.
So
we actually used to do monitoring back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and I think we sunsetted in the late 90s, if I recall. Bill, you might be able to remember at all. When actually it was run out of Region 1 nationally, we would put dosimeters all throughout the United States, right next to the licensees and the states. And what we were finding is that they were very consistent in what the licensees were reporting. All the sites report their monitoring results, and the NRC inspects those for running plants and decommissioning plants that are putting out effluents. And Vermont Yankee, in this case, there's no effluents. So as of like 2 or 3 years ago. So it's very, very limited, as you can imagine.
Are these reported? I know that there's the annual radiological effluent release reports. Those are issued every year, and they can be found on the NRC site, I've seen. But
yes.
Those are prepared by, actually, they used to be prepared by Steve Skibinowski years ago, from what I understand, our recently departed chair.
Okay.
But those effluence release reports are reported to you by NorthStar, and then you take a look, you confirm them, basically.
Correct. And we have in our records the effluent reports from Entergy, and before that from whoever owned Vermont Yankee before that. They actually go back to the time when they first started operating in 1972. Some of them are not available on the website, but that doesn't mean the NRC doesn't have them. We have the hard copies.
Yeah. I'm going to submit to the panel that we have those, actually links to those on our website. I see Dave Eastman has his hand up. I'm recognizing you, David.
I think my question was really kind of along the way is where you were going, Lisa, is and maybe this is actually to Corey, but can those and results of those monitoring activities be reported to the NDCAP in some way that we can get them on our site and use them in our own decommissioning evaluations?
Yes, I think that's possible. Since they're there, we just have to link to them. And so, we as a panel can decide that we would like to include that as part of our annual report even, which we'll be discussing later. Tony, I don't know if you're there. I can't see if people have their hands up, so you're going to have to help.
I'm not seeing any hands up. What happens is if someone uses reaction, the reaction.
Okay,
link,
I just want to make sure.
The hands go up at the top of the screen, so I see them right away.
I see. I understand that NRC is currently at the plant. This is the 6th inspection this year. Have there been any violations?
Yes, there have. At Vermont Yankee, you mean?
Vermont Yankee.
Yeah, I think last year. Steve, do you want to talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, I can't exactly remember when it was, but we did have
the security violation for aggregate
security violation for the Part 37 materials. And there's also something that I should mention. Tony briefly mentioned our enforcement policy. We also have what we refer to as minor violations, and those do not necessarily get put into a report. They're considered of such low safety significance that we don't necessarily put in the report. So there have been a handful of minor violations along the way, but again, nothing of any significance that would even get put into one of our reports. I think the one Tony mentioned, the security one for the radioactive material, was the last one that we had, and I believe that was last year.
Yeah.
And worker safety violations on the radiological front?
No, they have done a very good job from an RP from a radiation protection standpoint. Actually, Vermont Yankee is, I would say, our best performing site in Region 1. Well, basically, talking to our inspectors from the other regions, probably the best performing site in the country in decommissioning.
That's an incredible endorsement. And so we're so happy to hear that. Would you agree with Bill Irwin's assessment that it's the next couple of years ahead that most plants find problems, that we're entering a phase where, the reactor building is coming down, we are destroying concrete below the surface, riling things up? Would you agree with his assessment that this is a critical phase of decommissioning that we're entering over the next couple of years?
Right. Absolutely. They're going to be, over the next year and some change, they will be taking down the reactor building. So yes, that's, but they've already, but to put things in perspective, they've already removed the vast majority of radioactive material at the site. Okay. And I'm talking about beyond just putting the spent fuel assemblies on the pad, right? They have removed all the reactor internals, the reactor vessel itself, what we refer to as SSCs, structure systems and components. Inside the reactor building, most of those are now gone. So they have removed the vast majority of the radioactive material. Now, what happens is when they bring the building down, again, important to monitor, to keep an eye on the monitoring wells, right, to see if anything is disturbed. I don't think it's real likely, but again, it's very important for them to keep an eye on that. And then what will happen is, when everything's removed, then they will be surveying all the remaining land will be getting surveyed. And that's where, that's very important, obviously. And that's where they may, I guess that'll be the good indicator of how they did, right? What they find when they did those surveys.
So it's an important phase. I wouldn't call it the critical phase. The critical phase is moving fuel. They've done that successfully. It's an important phase based on Bill's 100% right. This plant's been there for 50 years. You never know what's under there. So when you take stuff apart, you may find something, and that's actually been found at other sites. Doesn't mean it's necessarily they're going to find it there, but there's the potential. So, yeah.
Marvin Resnikov has his hand up.
Yes.
When we went around the site, Alyssa, myself, and David, we went near the storage pad, and I didn't see any radiation detectors at the perimeter of the storage pad, but maybe I wasn't looking hard enough.
They do have dosimeters set up around the pad, and they have a set system of going out and doing periodic surveys. The radiation protection technicians go out with instruments, and they do take surveys on the pad and around the pad on a regular basis.
So at the site in the ISFC pad, you'll see a series of fences. The inside fence is the protected area fence, if you will. They would typically put the dosimeters on the inside fence. Why is that? Because radiation is similar to heat in that it's 1 over R squared law, so that if it's okay on the inside of the fence, then it's okay, 10 feet away, which is 1 over R squared. So it's much further, it's much less. If whatever the reading is, it's 1 over R squared less, a little further out. So it's very restrictive, and so they do monitor it.
I was asking the question because if there is, that's where all the radioactivity is on the site, for the most part. And
yes, in a can that's series of that's welded, and it's very robust, and it weighs 200 tons each. So yes,
it's going to sit there for quite some time.
Possibly, yes. Which is why we take. We're very careful in our inspections for that, because we know that it may be out there for 30, 40 years. And hopefully it'll get transported somewhere soon before, I retire.
Any other questions from panel members before we open it to any questions from the public? I do apologize that this segment is going on for a long time, but we really haven't heard a lot about radiological monitoring in the past few years, so we're kind of just catching up here a little bit. So I appreciate everyone's patience. Any questions from members of the public who are now on the call? And Tony, help me, because I only get a little limited view, so I can see some questions, but not.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any hands coming up right now.
Okay. Great.
Last call, folks.
Yeah. Any other questions for the members of the NRC or for Dr. Irwin? I'm glad that the particulate matter sampling is been resumed. Bill, I don't know if my concerns are warranted, but I think when you're breaking up a lot of concrete and stuff, that might be particulate matter in the air that lands outside the fence, and we want to keep apprised of those kinds of occurrences should they happen. So thank you so much for your vigilance. And thank you to the staff members of NRC. We really appreciate you coming tonight. And I'm sure we'd love to have you back again as we move forward. It was very instructive to have you here walking us through where we fit in the greater scheme of decommissioning, even regionally and nationally. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The next item on our agenda tonight is the NorthStar update. Corey Daniels. Are you ready, Corey?
Very much am.
More than ready.
Just bear with me for a moment, Corey, till I get back to your slides. This thing always fights me. Okay, there we go. Okay, you should be seeing those now.
Yeah, and I have a firm commitment to keep this under 10 minutes. So, Tony, go ahead. Next slide, please. All right, as always, and a reminder, and very much appreciate the endorsement from multiple folks with our performance to date. Part of this comes with us continuing to focus on safety in all aspects, including radiological, environmental, industrial, and nuclear. It's been our goal all along to do it right. And we know that'll be doing it safe, and that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. With that said, you guys have seen this slide before. For anyone who's attended these meetings, this is a macro of our overall schedule. It shows a number of the activities associated with the decommissioning, large component removal of buildings and structures, and obviously spent fuel management that will continue until there's a place to take the fuel. And one thing I would mention is, since we are far ahead of schedule, the site restoration will likely occur ahead of what's projected on here as well, along with the rest of the decommissioning. Next slide, please. As we talked about quite a bit, our focus on safety, we continue to call this acceptable, mostly because the only acceptable answer is perfect. Anything less than that is not acceptable. Overall, we ask our people to do pretty much the impossible, and that's to show up and do the kind of activities they're performing year in and year out without causing any harm to themselves or each other. And they've done a tremendous job for that. We're up over 1.8 million person hours on site, still without a lost time OSHA recordable accident, which is tremendous. Our regulatory performance, as mentioned before, still no cited violations since NorthStar ownership has taken over. As Steve had mentioned, there's been some very minor violations that have occurred, but no cited violation to date. And that's kind of the threshold we set for the level that rises to, I'll say, a noteworthy event. As far as production goes, we still remain well ahead of schedule. The bulk decommissioning work and the efforts with the license termination planning are well ahead of schedule. Next slide, please. So this is a picture from about 3.5 weeks ago. You can see what is a tremendously large excavator that weighs about 265,000 pounds, reaching down into what used to be the term building and cleaning out most of the concrete foundation for that structure, including the turbine pedestal. Next slide. Another picture of where the turbine building was and removing that material with the reactor building in the background. You can actually see what looks like some pipes coming through the wall just above the cab of that excavator. Those were actually the main steam rings that connect between the turbine building and the reactor building. Next slide, please. And then here's kind of backed up, looking directly towards the east. And you can see the lower levels of the heater bay and the bottom of the turbine building basically all the material is now pretty much removed from that space. And it's taken down in nearly every spot to more than 4 feet below grade. Next slide, please. Again, large pile of segregated turbine building structural steel. For the most part, we've been able to survey and free release this material for recycling purposes. Next slide, please. You've seen a number of pictures in the last 1.5 years of the Taurus area, a tremendously huge 1 million+ gallon tank and a lot of piping and components. And now you can see that room is almost entirely clear. Next slide, please. Cooling towers have been backfilled and taken to final grade. All that fill was brought in, surveyed and checked and sampled and placed. Next slide, please. We have staged a good amount of material from our designated borrow pits, and this will be for the discharge structure to fill in that area and restore or basically grade the bank contour similar to each side of it once the structure is removed and all those permits are in place. Next slide, please. One of the things we had to do was reroute a storm drain and set it basically just to the side of the discharge structure. Used to discharge basically into the discharge structure area. So we rerouted that drain line, and that will facilitate our ability to do the rest of the demolition of the discharge structure and restore that bank. Next slide. So this is kind of a unique photograph. This is what we call the forebay of the discharge structure. To the grading side, to the right of the photo, that's where the large lines would go back basically to the plant itself. And then this area would be filled with water, and you can kind of see the staining on the walls all the way up near the top. And that's where the water level would have been when the plant was running. This is all emptied out in preparation for doing the discharge structure demolition. Next slide, please. The spent fuel pool, emptied and cleaned for the very last time. We will perform some fixative to this, and then it will get destroyed when we go after the reactor building. Next slide. One of the last couple of what I would consider significant radiological components is there's a small heat exchanger underneath of those lead blankets that will be basically placed into what we call a super sack container and routed in place and then shipped on a rail car. Next slide. And this is one of the other last rooms that has a component in it that has some radiological significance. We actually broke through the walls to make an access point to get into there. You can see how thick the walls are for that and the work that goes into doing that safely. Next slide, please. And then that's what the wall looks like all opened up. And those are the reactor water cleanup heat exchangers. And the same process will happen to those as I just described for the fuel pool heat exchangers. Next slide. Similarly, the normal personnel access area into the what we call the dry well or the containment. Those walls have been removed on each side. And as you can see on the photo on the right, the large pipes and valves and lines that go and connect into the area inside the containment are now accessible for demolition, and we'll pull all that material out as well. And this is basically just us continuing to empty out the reactor building, remove all the piping and the components, and that will allow us to perform demolition on the reactor building. Next slide. And that's just another shot of that same location from the other side. And that kind of rounded frame you can see on the left is actually the personnel access that goes into that drywall area. Next slide. So as those components come out of the drywall area, we bring them up in sacks to the refill floor, and then we transport them outside and prep them for shipment by rail. Next slide. And speaking of loading out material, all the concrete and debris from the turbine building pedestal left by rail as well. And it's just a picture of one of those gondola cars getting loaded. Next slide. And as always, I give you guys a fairly fresh picture of material leaving the site. You know, it's a very busy year for us from a material shipment standpoint. I think we're up pretty close to 240 shipments on the year. Those are all photos of shipments leaving the site, including some structural steel being sent off for recycling on that bottom right-hand picture. Next slide. So So speaking of shipping and material volumes, we've been on track with 4 to 5 rail cars per week. We're coming up on 800 shipments total, 230 shipments to date as of the 5th. And you can see over 2 million cubic feet of material leaving and 92.5 million pounds. Next slide, please. As far as the non-RAD site characterization remediation, not a lot has changed, which is a good thing. What it means is our overall characterization is accurate. Our split sampling continues to correlate, which means the data that the state agencies, contracted resources have done split samples on have all lined up with the data that we've collected as well. We continue to work with Agency of Natural Resources, and we are working towards determining that we have met the IRULE site investigation completion criteria, and we'll continue to work with Brian Bradley and his team and the legal staff with the DPS to make that happen. And we have bi-weekly calls to continue those efforts. And beyond that, we have the post-decommissioning groundwater monitoring program still being developed with input. And we have renewed our annual inspection reports for the stormwater permits with no significant issues, just minor maintenance activities. So overall, it's a good story. We didn't find anything new since we last had this meeting, and no surprises means that, again, the site appears to be as clean as we believe it is. We will continue to perform discovery to confirm that. Next slide. So that pretty much concludes the presentation for NorthStar progress. As you can tell, the pictures are getting to be more larger machine versus concrete and steel. And once the reactor buildings finish being cleaned out, when we go after demolition of it, probably end of first quarter, beginning of second quarter next year, we'll have more photos of that activity as well. Thanks, Tony.
Okay. Okay, next we'll hear from the state agency, the Agency of Natural Resources, DEC is next, and then the Department of Public Service report on the trust funds.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Graham Bradley with Department of Environmental Conservation, DEC, which is one of the departments within A&R. Corey already gave a little summary there of our work. So the contaminated sites management section that I'm within, we're providing oversight of non-radiological site investigation and cleanup, and also within my division are some of the permitting organizations. So one of my jobs is just to facilitate those bi-weekly meetings, including Tony and Bill, who are on this meeting from Department of Health and Department of Public Services, together with NorthStar and Haley and Aldrich. And on those meetings, just for information, Corey gives an update much similar to he's given today, perhaps going into a little more depth, but without the nice photographs. So I always appreciate seeing the photographs on this call. Now, from our point of view, we're kind of at a point before the demolition began. There was site investigations to identify, looking at potential source areas of non-radiological contaminants. They were investigated, and there's plans. There's a couple of areas of petroleum contamination where there will, once the demolition is complete, there will be excavation and filling with clean soils in those areas, and that's likely to be next year. So we're at this point at the moment where the initial investigation was conducted. The groundwater monitoring is in a hiatus at the moment. Some of the wells around the main structures on site were decommissioned, and they will actually be reinstalled after the demolition is complete. There was a risk of those getting destroyed. So that will continue after the demolition and decommissioning of above ground structures is complete. And as the demolition and excavation down to 4 feet continues, there will be post-demolition surveys to look at potential for non-radiological contamination in those areas. We're not expecting them any. We've already investigated areas where we thought there may have been non-radiological contamination, but just to be sure, there's additional surveys taking place after that demolition and excavation. And then on the permitting side, there's not a great deal going on at the moment. There's still the direct discharge permit not being used at the moment. There's no specific non-radiological hazardous waste being removed from the site now. There's a public well on site that's permitted, and there's no issues there. As Corey mentioned, there's the ongoing ongoing stormwater permit inspections, no issues there. And there is a stream alteration permit to reinstate the bank around the discharge and the intake structures. There were some updates to that, to the drawings and the plans for the intake structure, just to maintain so as to maintain the stability of the bank with the proper slope, the proper grading on that. So I just had one slide tonight. I'm anticipating there will be more for me to talk about moving forward into next year as the buildings go, when we start looking at what's remaining in the ground. Yeah, thank you.
Alyssa, I think you're muted.
Oh, thank you very much. Sorry about that. Next, we have the Department of Public Service.
Hi, good evening. My name is Eric Guzman. I'm a staff attorney with the Department of Public Service, Public Advocacy Division. I'm just here to provide a brief overview of the department's role and an update on the current funding to complete decommissioning since NDCAP's last meeting in September. As always, joining me on the call are Nicholas Kapik and Mark Meir, who are the department's financial and technical consultants for the Vermont Yankee decommissioning project. Next slide, please, Tony. Just in the way of background, under the 2018 Memorandum of Understanding approved by the Vermont Public Utility Commission, the Department of Public Service is charged with conducting an ongoing review of the financial performance and technical progress of the decommissioning site restoration work for the project. On the financial side, we review the financial performance of the project. The department's consultants analyze the health of NorthStar and its corporate affiliates and assess the viability of those MOU financial assurances to fund decommissioning and site restoration work, including the trust balances. On the technical side, the department's consultants confirm that the work performed is reasonable and consistent with those withdrawals on the trust, nuclear decommissioning trust, through regular site visits. We also evaluate the project to identify any risks or concerns that could challenge completion. And as part of the department's role review, we receive monthly reporting from NorthStar, which includes a decommissioning progress report, updated project schedule, as well as a pay item disbursement and earned value reporting. The department also receives a 30-day notice of intended disbursement from the SRT for any site restoration work. We also conduct monthly meetings with NorthStar to follow up on any information requests from the monthly and annual reporting. We also have monthly meetings with A&R to discuss project progress. Much of the monthly and annual financial reporting is confidentially designated material. However, the publicly available reporting, including those trust balances, a high-level pay item disbursement summary, the annual public reports, are all published to the department's website. for viewing. Next slide, please, Tony. So this slide consists of the list of disbursements from the NDT, the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust, and the Site Restoration Trust since NDCAP's last meeting, dating back to August and September. Prior to withdrawing from either trust, NorthStar provides the department a 30-day notice, as I mentioned earlier, and the department has the authority to object to any disbursement from that Site Restoration Trust within that time frame. Additionally, the NRC receives a 30-day notice of disbursement from the NDT, and the department receives a copy of that. As of November 30th, the NDT balance sits at approximately 116.2 million, and the SRT balance is at 49.3 million. And as always, the disbursements listed here for work that's already been completed. Next slide, please, Tony. So this slide contains a table for the end of month at NDT and SRT balances since August. I've included some additional information here, so just wanted to give a little context that the trust balances are reflective of current market conditions due to rising interest rates. And because those trusts, the SRT and NDT assets are invested exclusively within U.S. Treasury securities, and those securities have laddered maturity dates, their value will differ as according to their present value, and then the value as they normalize at approach to maturity. I've included two columns for the NDT and SRT. The NDT balance in the first, or the NDT and SRT balance in the first and third column reflect the present value, assuming that those security investments are liquidated prior to their maturity date, and they would produce an unrealized loss. So that's if those investments were liquidated, that would be the present value. The second and fourth column reflect the actual value of the NDT and SRT when those securities are held to their maturity dates. Just doing moving on to the summary below for the three categories of work that we usually provide. The license termination activities, which encompass the removal of radioactive material and removal of Vermont Yankee facilities, totals $436.2 million, including pre-closing costs. As of November 2023, $412.6 million has been reported by NorthStar's earned, leaving $123.6 million remaining complete license termination work. The current balance for the NDT at maturity is at $118.7 million as of November. And I'll provide a little context on the next slide for the apparent discrepancy here. And then the spent fuel management costs total $290.9 million, with NorthStar earning $30.8 million as of November, leaving $260.1 to manage spent fuel. And NorthStar anticipates collecting that additional $276.5 million from the Department of Energy for those spent fuel management costs. And then site restoration costs, which encompass the cleanup of any non-radiological contamination, totals $25 million. NorthStar's earned $17.4 million to date, leaving $7.6 to complete site restoration work. And that site restoration fund contains $51 million at maturity as of November 30th. Next slide, please, Tony. So our consultants from 4 Points Group conduct site visits on a regular basis, the last one being done this month, actually, in December, which included an observation of work activities in the around the turbine building and reactor building areas. Based on those observations, no conditions observed during that time or during the site visit this month were consistent with the project progress that NorthStar has reported in its latest monthly status reports. And then with respect to the apparent discrepancy between the NDT balance and the remaining license termination activities, a large portion of that difference that's being reported now is just due to work that has been completed by NorthStar specifically related to shipping and disposal of the turbine building pedestal. But that value has not yet been reflected in the latest earned value reporting. So when that value of work that has been completed is factored into the total earned value figure in their NorthStar's upcoming reporting, that gap between that I reported on the previous slide will lessen between the remaining license termination work and the NDT balance. And we expect that earned value to be reflected in NorthStar's upcoming reporting. And then second, the NDT balance, as I mentioned earlier, is reflective of current market conditions. And the NDT also does generate a quarterly interest payment at an approximate 2% annual growth. And the NDT balance does not reflect that those anticipated interest payments as well. So the continuing interest on the NDT is expected to meet the remaining value for license termination work when it's all factored in. And then finally, just as a reminder, that the 2018 Memorandum of Understanding contains several financial assurances if there's ever any need for additional funding beyond the available trusts. That includes a $140 million support agreement from NorthStar's parent company, NorthStar Group Services, to pay for additional necessary expenses associated with decommissioning or site restoration. And there's also a $55 million financial escrow that is also an additional financial assurance in case there is ever any need beyond the trust fund. And finally, just based on the monthly and annual financial reporting received to date, NorthStar appears to be on course to complete the project with available funding. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, now we can open it up to some questions from members of the panel and the public. So if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll entertain those from the panel first. If you have a question, raise your hand using the hand raise function, and hopefully Tony can see you if I can't.
Looks like Bill Irwin has a question.
Bill Irwin.
Yes, thank you. I'm addressing this to Corey Daniels. Looking at the slides, there was the slide from due west of the reactor building of the wall between what was the turbine building and the reactor building. And you can see the pedestals there and the big hole that was the turbine building. There's a large amount of water in that, what used to be the turbine building basement. And there was a time when that water was being pumped to frac tanks and sent off as low-level radioactive waste. And there was a time when there were going to be some wells drilled to capture that water before it went into the turbine building basement. Can you describe what you folks are doing with that water that's in that turbine building lowest level as depicted in slide 7 of your presentation?
Sure, Bill. Thanks for the question. Overall, nothing has changed with our water management strategy. If the water requires it, we will still collect it, put it in frac tanks, and then ship it offsite. For the most part, we actually haven't seen a tremendous amount of intrusion into that lower level. There's actually not as much water in there as it might appear from the photos or from any folks who were on any of the tours, even with this last significant rainstorm we experienced. But overall, our water management strategy remains the same. We'll sample it and manage it as needed.
So if it is above the threshold values, you'll ship it somewhere. If it's below, are you pumping it to ground, or how do you dispose of it?
Yeah, for the most part, if it's below, we'll let it remain where it is. and then we'll collect it as needed, Bill.
Okay. So a lot of it might evaporate or some of it will seep into the ground, but follow the natural pathway.
And to put it in perspective, as mentioned by the NRC representatives, and as we've discussed multiple times, the water meets drinking water standards, even with trace amounts of tritium in it, that we do occasionally detect in that water in particular. Usually it's on the order of maybe a couple of hundred or a few hundred picocuries per liter, not anywhere near the 20,000 picocuries per liter that the drinking water standard threshold meets. So overall, that water, we can reuse it on site for dust control or other purposes, but it doesn't, there's no source term, so there's no additional tritium to be collected. And overall, it continues to decline in values as expected with no deviation from that.
Great, thank you.
And just to reassure the people on the call and yourself, Bill, I think I have asked the same questions, and Corey has explained this to me on our bi-weekly calls. I think perhaps it might have been a call when you were unable to make it. So it is something that I, as a hydrogeologist at the DEC, I'm keeping a close eye on as well.
Great, thanks.
Okay, I'm not
Question
seeing.
from the-
Oh, okay. We have one question from the public. Just one hand raised if we want to move to that.
Sure.
Okay, Skylar Gould had you had your hand raised first, so we'll go with you first.
Yeah, thanks. Is this a good time to ask about the license termination plan, or am I out of order here?
That's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I was just the recently released 2-year license termination plan. I'm wondering, what is the state's role in reviewing this plan and giving input to it? And with that in mind, what would the panel's role be in giving input to this license termination plan?
I think that's for Corey. Is that a question for Corey? Because I don't know the answer to that personally.
Yeah.
I could certainly take a shot at it. Skylar, overall, the license termination plan happens. The licensee submits that to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They have a very rigorous review process just to determine if the application or the license termination plan meets their submittal requirement. And then there's a pretty long review process and usually a number of requests for additional information and some dialogue that happens over time until that plan finally gets approved. Then there will be additional NRC public meeting precipitated as a result of that. And at that point, there will be an opportunity for the public to hear and provide feedback and comments. But to my knowledge, and as Liz has stated previously, because the license termination process is an NRC regulated function, the state is not directly involved in any decision making with that process.
So you don't see the panel having any input on this, at least even just as far as educating the public about what's going on?
Now, that is definitely the role of the panel to perform. With respect to the panel's function, I would just remind folks that our job is to do just what you described and also provide advice or opinions or advice to our legislators with respect to the Vermont Yankee decommissioning, but not directly to the decommissioning process itself.
Right, sure, of course. So with that in mind, this is a fairly complex document. I've tried to skim through it. It seems important that the panel educate itself on this termination plan. And I was wondering if there's any thought been given to hiring a consultant who can read and interpret this plan much better than the layman and advise the panel in its role as the advisor to the governor, the legislature, and the citizens of Vermont.
Do any other members of the state agencies want to comment on that? I would think that that would potentially be something that was reviewed by the state attorney and the Department of Public Service. I would assume are going to be reviewing those, but does anybody, maybe Tony, what is the state's role in oversight of that license termination plan in terms of its own interests?
Madam Chair, I think I'll speak to that point, if I may. So Commissioner Tierney here from the Department of Public Service. I think you just heard Corey explain that this is jurisdictional to the NRC. It's their process, not ours. So we don't have a stated rule in it per se. That doesn't mean that a body like the NDCAP can't organize itself if it wishes to comment as a member of the public or to participate in the public hearing process for the license termination and its plan at the NRC. But this is fundamentally not jurisdictional to the states, wherever such sites are cited. So it isn't a question of advising the governor or our congressional delegation. It's a question of the panel itself, if it so chooses, though I do have a question in my own mind as to whether the panel's jurisdiction extends to interjecting into federal proceedings and the like. So I think the way we have to think of it is the panel could style itself as a member of the public. And if it reaches an agreement as a panel to file comments and the substance of those comments, that's great. In terms of the idea that the member of the public has floated, that is certainly something that the panel can deliberate on if it so chooses. It can deliberate on whether it wishes to hire a consultant in order to help educate the panel and with that the public, because those proceedings in which the panel would be educated about the license termination plan and the specific proposal, I should think would be conducted in public. But that's really the extent of what we're looking at.
I see. And Chris Campany has also put a link into the NRC and reminds us, as Corey stated, there will be a public hearing at some point on that. I would submit that we consider this question as a panel, perhaps at the next meeting. I mean, what are we looking at here in terms of it's several year process? This is sort of the opening shot, right, Corey?
This is a very slow burn, right? The initial review from the NRC and the RAIs and the approval process is often 18 months. It's in 6 months for them to get to the point where they're ready to go over it in detail with us and request for additional information. We often end up, licensees will often end up with multiple revisions to a license termination plan throughout the process of the decommissioning. And the process is very structured and rigorous, and it's extremely robust. And as mentioned earlier by Tony Dimitriadis and Steve Hammann, and as most folks who are familiar with the MOU are aware, that process gets the site down to 25 millirem limit with 5 by water, and we have agreed to a 15 millirem limit with the state of Vermont and 5 by water with the intention of attempting to get down to 10. So we're already going to be targeting a very clean site at the finish line of this, and that license termination plan will reflect our efforts to meet all those requirements.
That's great. If I could just have one more thought. This is a incredible thing that the state of Vermont has been through, for the last 40 plus years. And it seems like it deserves some kind of I don't know if even celebration is the word, but at least some understanding that this is we've been through a lot here, and we're glad. I mean, it does sound. I really had no doubt that NorthStar has been doing a wonderful job, and I think that needs to be conveyed to the state well. And just what, just give the whole process some history too, and particularly in context of how NorthStar is bringing this to a close. I think it would be palliative, the word, to the state of Vermont to know that this is a process that's been brought to a more than satisfactory conclusion.
Well, that sounds good. We've still got some time. It's like the election. We can't really forecast till we're there. So let's just.
That's it. Yeah.
And thank you again to Corey, because a lot of it comes down to leadership. Any other questions here on those presentations before we move on?
We do have two questions, one from Ann Darling, also David Eastman. I think we should probably go to David first since he's on the panel, and we won't forget about you.
Okay, go ahead, Dave.
Okay, I just directly to June. Just to be totally clear, are you saying that no state experts will review the termination plan or report?
To my knowledge, that's correct. It's not jurisdictional to the state of Vermont. It's jurisdictional to the NRC. The NRC granted the license. The NRC's process for looking at these plans, reviewing the plans, as Corey said, is robust. It's a matter of federal law and federal regulation, which is also something that has the force and effect of law. It's not a state jurisdictional thing. It may be, and I am speculating here, and really I am speculating, it may be that the NRC at some point may see fit to consult the PUC on that, but I can't be sure of that. I'm freestyling here. But fundamentally, you have to think of this as there's a state jurisdictional element when it comes to the siting of the facility, as you probably well know, Dave. And that's governed by state law, and that's what the PUC process several years ago was used to resolve the transfer of the facility from Entergy to NorthStar for purposes of decommissioning. And that was the extent of the state oversight of this process.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think, if it's causing anybody discomfort, it's probably because some of this is a little ossified. It's been a while since we've thought about, the actual, end goal is in sight of decommissioning. To the company's credit, the process is ahead of time. So we're actually thinking about it even sooner than we might have ever expected. But fundamentally, the operation and ultimate decommissioning of a nuclear facility is a matter of shared jurisdiction, with 99% of it belonging to the federal government and 1% to the host state. And the host state's process has long since played itself out. And there's a very robust record of that. I think Chris Campany mentioned that there is a PUC process and several orders that, given the changing membership of the committee, it might not be a bad idea at some point to revisit some of those just to bring people up to speed on it. But this is something that the federal government has very clearly in hand, to the exclusion of state review.
Yes. Ann Darling?
I have a related but not directly related comment. So if Chris has his hand up, if there's something you want to say that's directly related, Chris, to what they were just talking about, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just say, I plugged the board, access to the board, Public Utility Commission, not board, order related to the sale. That was the docket that established the standards to which NorthStar and the state agreed. So that, as far as what standards the NorthStar is going to be held to by the state, that process has already concluded, and this panel was involved in giving some input during that process. So it may seem like a long time ago, but I mean, I think folks should have some comfort in the fact that it was a very rigorous process and the standards are quite high. So, and while this may be new to some folk, for others of us, it feels like well-trodden ground. But we can always go back over that well-trodden ground as folk want to kind of refamiliarize ourselves with what was agreed to.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, Anne?
Hi, thanks. And along with all the congratulations we'd add to the state for negotiating that strong MOU. Appreciate it. In this last conversation, we've touched on public education and talking to the legislature. And I think there's a wonderful opportunity coming up for the panel to meet with the committees in the legislature that you have a most direct relationship with, maybe sometime, earlier in the session that's going to start next month. And I just want to encourage that there be that be a joint session of the two committees, and that there be a public, whatever, you're shaking your head, Lisa, but that there be a public, that it be open to the public, and including the virtual element if possible. And that there, it could be part of an education process for the public that, we can talk more about some other meeting that isn't so chock full.
I'm only shaking my head because we did consult with Laura Sibilia and Representative Coffey, their state representatives, on this. And they said that basically there would be two separate, the House information session and a Senate, and also a separate local delegation presentation. So, we can talk. I was going to bring that up later on in the agenda, Anne. So
they're bringing it up. We can talk more later. All right. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Corey or members of the state agencies on their report before we move on the agenda?
I just wanted to add something, as long as no one else has further comments on this. Just to remind the commissioner, we did receive a formal copy of the license termination plan when it was issued to the NRC. We were notified. It is a rather lengthy document, well over 1,000 pages. It is my intent to read through that when I have time to do it. Certainly, if I have questions on this, I can certainly bring those questions back to my NRC points of contact or my contacts at Vermont Yankee to see, to get clarification on what is done. So, I will at least be looking at this. We can, if necessary. I've alerted the department's consultants on this, that these reports are available if they have opportunity, or if it is normally appropriate for them. This is an area where I'm learning. So I know I'm seeing June shaking her head no.
I'm shaking my head, Tony, because there are two things that are being melded here. The specific question was, does the state have a role in this? And the answer is that's governed by federal law.
Right.
It's not a matter of state law. We have received a copy because federal law requires that. We are the repository of record. And if a member of the public wanted to see this in order to prepare themselves to comment in the public proceeding at the NRC, they would come to the Department of Public Service to look at that document. As for your review, which doesn't surprise me because you are my diligent nuclear engineer, I would expect that you would look at it and you would notify me if you had issues, and we would make our decision from there. But as matters stands right now, the department has no role under federal law to review and dictate or advocate the NRC's judgment in exercising its discretion as to whether to terminate this license or not. That is a surrender process that is governed by federal law.
It does seem appropriate for the panel to look at it and to have more discussion at a future board meeting. I would submit because of the public hearings that will take place and because of our mandate to provide education to the public, I would think there would be some role, but we can discuss that within the issues committee or determine perhaps in between meetings as to whether or not we take it up at a meeting next year.
Okay.
Is there any other commentary at this point on these matters? I don't see any, so I'm going to move on to the discussion and vote on the 2024 budget and educational expense protocol that had been developed after Commissioner Tierney had advised that we develop such a protocol for any expenses. The budget, I think it was also submitted. All members of the panel were privy to it. And as were the educational expense protocol. Are there any comments on that from members of the panel at this point?
Lisa, I have one comment on the protocol.
Yes.
Which I thought was very well done. I'm going to guess that you and Dave Eastman worked very closely with Emily Davis on this.
Yes, we did.
And so I certainly offer my compliments to you and to Dave for the work on this. I'm sorry Emily isn't here to receive the compliments for what they are worth in person, but I thought it was very nicely done. The one small edit I would have made to it is that the NDCAP chair recommends approval of the requested expenditure to me. The NDCAP chair does not approve it as a function of the NDCAP chair's powers, simply because under the statute, the responsibility for approving the expenditure of funds is vested in the commissioner of the Public Service Department. I think I am talking about the provision that is on page 2 at the bottom. It's item 2, NDCAP chair responds to expense request. And I think that should be amended to say, we'll either recommend approval of the expense.
I agree. Yes.
It's fine with me.
Yes, that's how it should have been written. But basically this creates a protocol for any panel members who believe they have an educational expense they'd like to submit. And it invests a lot of power in the chair, I would say. We did have questions about whether and how expenses should be put forward to the full panel, if and when. And we had questions regarding open meeting law in that query, just regarding if things could be approved in between panel meetings, or if you had to call a full panel meeting to actually approve an expense. It seemed arduous and unnecessary. However, we did feel it was necessary for once the commissioner approved an expenditure, that the other panel members were advised, and that the public was advised, and that's all taken into consideration within this protocol. Are there any other comments about it from other panel members or the public?
Lisa, I just want to be clear. I thought I heard you say a moment ago that this protocol pertains to educational expenses, but I think it's broader than that. I think it goes to the expenditure of the $35,000
yes,
that are at the disposal of the committee, of which education is a component.
That's correct. Sorry if it didn't.
Not at all. I just want to make sure, because I get confused. It's now, 8:30 in the evening.
Yes, and we do have other things to get to.
We got more to do.
So does anybody want to move to approve this protocol?
So moved.
And seconded?
Is it appropriate for me to second it?
I think so.
Okay, then I second it.
Are there any abstentions or objections? Is a voice, all who approved can say yay?
Yay.
Yay.
Abstain.
Corey's abstaining
David Pearson abstain.
and David Pearson is abstaining. You got that, Tony? Okay, so seeing as we
Tony, you're muted.
Tony, can you unmute?
Yes, sorry, my controls keep moving around on me here.
I understand.
Yes, okay. So I got that this was approved by yeas and nays, with 2 abstentions from Corey Daniels and David Pearson.
That's correct.
Okay, and it looks like we still have everyone who, all panelists who initially joined the meeting, yes, do appear to be online. So.
Okay, great. The budget that was submitted basically is very general, as you could see. Do we require a vote on that, or is that sufficient just to have shared that? There's no real need to approve that budget, is there?
Well, we're kind of making up our process here, Alyssa. I was checking our bylaws, and our bylaws don't have a lot of detail around budgeting.
I know, I noticed.
And seeing, to your point a moment ago, that the protocol vests quite a bit of power, if you will, in the chair, which I think is appropriate because that's why we have chairs for, big bodies of this nature. You just can't transact absolutely everything at a meeting like this. I do think that since it does vest that kind of power in the chair, subject to the commissioner's approval, it might be appropriate for the panel itself to vote on the budget so that the panel feels like it has some recourse if it doesn't like what the chair is doing, short of firing a chair. So you get one say a year. Here's how it's going to be spent. You were consulted and had a chance to, comment on it. And once it's been blessed by the panel, then the chair's got their marching orders to administer it.
I move approval.
I have a question. Or maybe a comment. I don't know where this falls, but so some of this money is budgeted for things that we may not need, such as meeting space rentals. And so I'm just wondering what we're voting on. Are we voting on each line item? Are we voting on the total that can be reapplied in different areas if not needed where it's placed? How much discretion is with the panel once we vote to move money around, or with the chair to move money around where needed more?
I think that we're voting on the whole budget as it stands, Dave. And if there are items that go unused, that's fine. I mean, under the legislation, we have up to $35,000 annually for the needs of the panel. That doesn't mean we have to spend $35,000. In fact, we never have come close since we've had it. So,
yeah.
I mean, I think we assume that these budgetary categories are adequate for what we foresee. And if we do deem that we would like to redo the website because outreach requires it, we have some funds there to use for that purpose. That's something that we can discuss in the future. But for now, these are the expenses that we think we can incur up to for any given category. And I think that, what we were talking about is just having panel approval of it and move on.
I move approval.
So that Chris has made a motion to approve the budget for 2024. Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Tierney. Can we do a yay, nay vote again? Is that appropriate?
Aye.
All who approve say yay.
Yay.
Yay. Any abstentions? I suspect they'll be the same as before.
Abstain.
Abstain.
Okay, with the two abstentions of Corey and David. So moved. The budget is approved. Let's move on to the next. Are we ready to move on to the next item, folks? Which is the review of the 2023 annual report. Everybody has that language.
So I'll just offer technically, before we discuss an item, we're supposed to move it and second it, and then we open it up for discussion. So in that spirit, I will move approval of the
For some
report.
reason, all of a sudden, my microphone.
I'll second that.
And I can't seem to turn it back on.
Somebody speaking, then we can hear you. Can you please mute?
Yeah, I think that's a message to me from Bob Leach. I think someone was just trying to call me. I'm going to guess that it was Bob. I'll look in. Well, geez, I can't do two.
He's not on the call anymore. He's not on the Zoom.
Bob, can you?
Bob's here.
Bob, can you still hear us?
Yes.
Okay, we can hear you. I didn't quite catch what the issue was. I'm not going to have time right now to check the message. We can see you. I think you froze up.
No, he's still moving.
Okay.
Tony, I think we're good. We can hear Bob and we can see Bob. He hears us.
He's trying to show something.
My speech is muted.
Speaker is muted. So Bob, that would be on your own computer, I think.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we can't do anything about that on this end. So what you need to do is look around. You should have, if you can find your control line, which keeps moving around on me, but look at the bottom of the screen in the lower left-hand corner. There will be a little microphone that is marked mute or unmute. If there's a little negation sign through it, you're muted. And it looks like you're toggling that. You're unmuted right now. So try saying something again.
You can't hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
It says mute.
Nope, we got liftoff.
No, you're unmuted. You're good. You're good.
It got unmuted. All right.
You have something after all that you want to say?
It doesn't matter. Nothing significant to worry about.
Okay. So I think that we can move on to the approval of the annual report language. My only consideration, Tony, was that, there's quite a bit from the meeting tonight that will have to be approved as part of the annual report. And I know that we've had special sessions to approve annual reports in the past, but there's just missing information from the report regarding the total amount of radioactive waste shipments and other things that Corey just reported on tonight. So I'm just wondering how, we can take comments, but will it actually be possible to approve the annual report tonight?
We in years past, we've done this, that I've been given direction to say, okay, put in a summary for tonight's meeting, complete, get end of year data from Vermont Yankee and report it that way. I would think that the only thing that I mean, I know what to do with those items. About the only additional thing I would ask for is, at the end of the report, we discuss schedule priorities, meeting priorities for the upcoming year. Does the panel have any of those right now? And I can take direction on that right now, and we'll get something in on it.
I would suggest that. I mean, it's 8:36. I would suggest we just acknowledge that in the beginning of the year, the panel will identify what its priorities are going to be, as opposed to trying to open up that can of worms right now, because in some respects, it's not warned on the agenda either.
Okay. I would agree with that. Does
I
anybody else
agree
have
with
any?
Chris. Yeah.
Okay.
I also think it's good. The report is designed to report on what the panel did.
Mhm.
And so, we're not so much warning folks what we're gonna do. And we're about to elect a chair and all that good stuff. And so the convo about what we plan to do in the coming year really has to wait another day. And it's not necessary. It's not required by law, I guess, in the report. And I've said more than needs saying.
Does anybody have any comments on the report as it stands right now? I mean, I had a couple typos and edits that I went through that I could just mention now or not, or it's just take up with Tony later. There's nothing.
If they're not substantive, Lissa, meaning
They are not.
gonna rock my world. I think you can inquire of the panel as to whether they agree with my view, which would be talk to Tony about it.
Okay.
And meanwhile, kudos to Tony for having this prepared such that we're in a position to timely file in January, would be how I would resolve it.
Okay, that sounds good to me if others agree.
I'll just note one thing.
How do we approach it then?
Yeah, earlier today, Lissa, I know you reached out to Diane Curran, who was one of the speakers at one of the committee meetings that is summarized in the report. I saw an email pop up that I know she responded. I haven't had time to see what she said. I don't know if she has edits to what how I summarize that particular meeting. But I just bring that up so folks are aware of that.
Yeah.
Tony, who is this person?
Yeah.
Diane Curran was one of the invited speakers.
Okay, but she's not a member of the panel. She's not a member of one of our subcommittees.
That's correct.
Okay, then either edit around it if she has concerns in the email and eliminate that. It's not germane to our report, and an outside person doesn't edit the report of the NDCAP.
Very good.
Oh, well, an opinion was proposed that she had asserted an opinion that I did not recall her saying. That's why I reached out to say, is this accurate? Because that was not my recollection. That's
different. That's you, a panel member, speaking up, and that's very different. And I would suggest before we hold up reporting on our panel report that we simply edit around it.
Okay.
And if it's controversial or something, I would suggest that it just be struck, unless it's like make or break on this report.
It's not at all.
I don't think it is.
And there are just a couple, mostly typos, so I can go over that with Tony. There's nothing that's substantively altering the report that I had to say. If any other panel members have any substantive changes to the report, now is the moment to speak so we can all go over it. Otherwise, do I see a motion to approve the annual report as it is?
You've already had that. You've already got a motion in a second, so you can call the vote if you want to.
Okay, let's call the vote. Everybody who approves the minutes please say yay.
The report.
The annual report.
The 2023 annual report. I know I just had my COVID vaccine too. It's starting to, I think, hit me. Please say yay.
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 Any abstentions? If you didn't read the report, you have to abstain. Any noes? Okay. Looking good. So the panel has approved the annual report to the legislature for 2023. We did discuss renewing pre-COVID practice of bringing the report to the legislature in person sometime early next year. That was suggested by members of the public in terms of enhancing the panel's outreach. So I did take it upon myself to talk to Representative Coffey and also panel member Laura Sibilia about that, and they both concurred that they thought that was a good idea, and that there would be a presentation from any panel members who wanted to participate to the local delegation around Vermont Yankee here in Windham County. This would all be virtual for them. They meet regularly, and she has invited us to do that as a panel, select members who would like to participate. And then the House Environment and Energy Committee would also call, and Laura Sibilia is on that committee, and she would help facilitate, and also the Senate Committee. And we just got a comment from Chris Williams suggesting that should we go to Montpelier to do this work, that we meet in a committee venue like room 10 that will accommodate public attendees who can ask questions and make comments as well, which I would also, I would agree with that. Any feelings?
I think that's going to be up to the legislature to decide where we meet and how. So,
okay. Well, we can certainly make them known that we would like it to be a room that can accommodate the public.
I think that's right, Lisa. That's exactly what we can do. But to Chris's point, they don't like being told how we're going to use their space. They get mad at me when I do that.
Okay. I think we can let the representatives and state senators take the lead here for
exactly. Exactly.
Okay, I just want to be sure I'm clear on what the panel wants done here. We want to pursue meeting with the House and Senate energy committees, whatever they are called now.
Let's just call it agencies of jurisdiction or committee of jurisdiction.
But we are also talking about local, meeting with local legislative representatives from the local districts to Brattleboro, Vernon area. Is that correct? Did I hear that correctly?
That's what Sarah Coffey had recommended in addition.
Okay. I need to go back and recheck the email from Sarah because just so I'm clear on that. But I wanted to make sure that's what we're agreeing to do right now.
Well, technically, the panel hasn't agreed to anything.
Right.
We've
but
had
that's what we are proposing. I'm sorry for talking.
Yeah, there are two. You're right. There are two different strains, and I think the original proposal was, to present the annual report to the legislature in Montpelier, and that one is up to some select delegation of this panel to steer, and for the legislators in the respective chambers to decide to whom and when and how and where they want it presented. And then the second, as I understood it, was outreach to the legislators who are local, if you will, to the site. It's not clear to me whether we're talking about Southern Vermont or Vernon or the counties down there, and that may be something the committee wants to clarify. But but those are two different things, is my point, and two different presentations.
It would be the Windham County delegation, according to Representative Coffey.
Listen, my suggestion would be if they want that, they typically arrange that themselves.
Yes. They have a regular monthly Zoom, and she was suggesting that whoever from the panel would like to participate in that Zoom to let them know that the report has been filed and allow them to ask any questions should they have them, basically.
So I guess I would just suggest we don't have to make a decision about that. that's Sarah can offer that up to the members of the panel and the public, and then whoever wants to show up can show up, but we don't have to pre-approve it or anything.
Okay.
And I think all we're agreeing to is that, yes, we will make ourselves available to the legislature should they choose to ask us to present the report.
Are there any other comments on that from members of the panel or the public?
Well, the only comment I would make is that that's a function I would typically identify with the chair. That's why we have a chair, to do that kind of representation. And then if the chair wants to invite other panel members, or other panel members want to reach out to the chair and say, I'd like to be part of that, as far as I'm concerned, that's fine by me.
And we'll know who the chair is soon.
There you go.
Okay. So let's leave it alone then. There's no need for further action. Agreed?
I'm not sure I understand. So far, I know that we are supposed to give a report, make it available to the Senate and the House. And after that, I'm confused what everybody is saying here. Are we going to hold some meeting for the local representatives? Or are we letting them know, oh, they're going to get the report because it's submitted? We just let them ask us if they want a presentation by us?
Prior to COVID, I had participated with Corey and others in going up to Montpelier and presenting the report formally to
Yeah, that I got. I understand that.
the committee.
The other part.
The Sarah Coffey part was, she felt, when I asked her for some direction on this, she felt that the local delegation would like to hear from the panel about the report, and that they do a monthly meeting, and that either the chair or panel members, it could be determined by the chair, as Commissioner Tierney suggests, to just appear on their Zoom and talk, answer any questions about the report, and make sure they know it exists, basically.
And Bob, that'll be it there, but we don't need to do anything on that.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. We're going to give it to the Senate and the House. After that, they got to know what they're getting when it's given. And if they want more from us, let them ask. That sound reasonable?
Yeah, it just depends on how proactive we want to be in terms of public outreach. We've been getting some pressure as a panel to do more public outreach regarding our activities. And so we thought it might be a good time to go back up to Montpelier, and, Corey can talk about what a great job NorthStar is doing, and people will know that the panel is doing its work, and be slightly proactive regarding our presence as a panel. But if there's disagreement on the panel, then certainly that's why we're talking about it now.
We're talking about different things here. For the presentation to the Senate and the House.
I think it's too complicated. I think we're submitting the report. They'll ask us to testify if they want us to, and Sarah will organize a meeting with whoever on the panel wants to show up, should she choose to do so. So I think it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I can handle that.
Okay.
Let Coffee and her group, they'll get it up there, and they can contact us, any one of us, and let us know that they would like input directly from us. I'm all set for that. I'll drive you over there, Lisa.
Yeah, it might, if they do, it might all be virtual. We don't really know. So, but that is up to the legislatures. If they would like us to come, we are quite willing to do so. And I guess it will, as we said, it will be left up to the chair, and the chair will let others know. If other panelists choose to join, that would be great.
Okay, I can handle it.
Okay, I think we can move on, right, folks?
Yep. Go.
Yes.
So, election of panel officers for 2024 is the next category. I'd like to elect someone. I would nominate Chris Campany to take over the chair.
I'll second that.
Chris, you've done it before. You want to do it again?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
So let's have a vote.
If I may interject for a moment, typically as a matter of good housekeeping, this is where I step in to run the election as the default chair in the event you folks can't choose among yourselves. So, Alyssa, I'll relieve you of the burden so you're not in the awkward position of casting a vote as you are also conducting an election. We have one nomination, and I didn't hear Chris fight it off. So you better speak now, bud. Otherwise, I think
if somebody else wants it, please, you're welcome to.
Okay, somebody else, are you on the line? This is going to be the shortest election ever. I don't see somebody else here tonight. So I am going to move the nomination, or better said, I'm going to ask if I have a motion to vote on the nomination of Chris Campany to serve as the next chair of the NDCAP. Do I have such a motion? Thank you, Bob. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. I think given the importance of the vote, we will do a roll call vote for this.
Absolutely.
So if y'all are ready, I've actually got a list, but I'm going to take my glasses off, and I don't want anybody laughing while I move the paper closer to my eyes. I go to the eye doctor on Thursday this week, first time since COVID. So here we go. Ms. Weinmann, are you yay or nay?
Yay.
Okay. Mr. Leach, are you yay or nay?
Yay.
Mr. Resnikoff. Mr. Resnikoff.
I think he's left.
Mr. Resnikoff, are you muted? Okay, we will come back in a moment. Mr. Eastman.
Yay. Mr.
Campany, you're going to vote for yourself?
Sure.
Okay, that's a yay. That was kind of weak, though. Mr. Amato.
Yay.
Mr. Daniels.
Sorry, Chris. Yay.
Mr. Pearson. Mr. Pearson.
Yay.
Mr. Long.
Yay.
Dr. Irwin.
Yay.
Now, Commissioner Tierney's going to throw in a big hooray, yay. I'm going to ask Mr. Bradley today, are you here on behalf of Ms. Coppolino, or are you here simply reporting out to the agency, on behalf of the agency? Mr. Bradley? Graham Bradley?
Graham, you still here?
Oh gosh, after all this, I hope we have a quorum.
Well, I'm about to count noses, Lissa, never fear. So we're going to call that a not here to represent DEC. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 present members, which is 1/9, and therefore a quorum. And it would appear, Mr. Campany, that you are the next chair of the NDCAP, for which I am deeply grateful. Hooray.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Liz, I just want to say thank you so much for taking this over from Steve after his unexpected passing. So you did a great job. Thank you for picking it up.
Thank you.
And I will throw in and second everything Chris just said and more. And I think you've run an exceptionally well orchestrated and thoughtful meeting tonight. We also need to elect a vice chair. And I think the first question I will pose simply directly to Lissa is, would you be prepared to continue in the position, Lissa?
Yes.
Yes.
Somebody else. I mean, I defer if there's other interest to it, but
Okay.
happy to proceed as vice chair.
There's no way to twist arms on Zoom, so I'm not twisting your arm.
Second that nomination.
Well, I didn't nominate Chris. I simply inquired. So before we go any further, though, I do want to inquire, are there others here tonight who would be interested in serving as the vice chair? No, I'm not seeing any. So it would appear that we have one person who has expressed the willingness to serve. And Chris, I think you're nominating Alyssa. Is that correct? Okay. Do I have a second for the nomination?
I'll second.
Thank you so much, Dave. All right, we will proceed to a vote on the election of Alyssa Weinmann as the next vice chair. Again, we'll do this by roll call just because I enjoy saying your names. So here we go. Ms. Weinmann, are you going to vote or don't? Please don't abstain so you don't mess up our quorum.
Yes. Vote yes.
You're voting for yourself? That's, I wish there were young girls on tonight so they could see you do that. It's good to vote for yourself. Mr. Leach.
Yay.
Okay, Mr. Resnikoff's not here. Mr. Eastman.
Yay.
Mr. Campany.
Yay.
Mr. Amato.
Yay.
Mr. Daniels.
Yay.
Mr. Pearson.
Yay.
Mr. Long.
Yay.
Dr. Irwin.
Yay.
And Commissioner Tierney is one heck of a big yay, thank you, Yahoo as well. So congratulations, Alyssa Weinmann. You are unanimously reelected to serve as vice chair. I have to say, this is my the end of my 7th year as the commissioner designated to the NDCAP from the Department of Public Service. And I am really pleased to see the congenial tone that has evolved on the committee as we work with these difficult public policy issues that all of you are, from the bottom of your hearts as devoted public citizens, devoting your time and energy to. It's so hard in this country nowadays for people to gather and to express views that differ and to deal with complex matters. And I don't know that a lot of people are watching us, but those who are can take pride in what they see this committee doing in terms of its tone and civility and process in working through these very important issues. So I congratulate all of you on that. With that, we have concluded the election, and I believe good form would be that we turn this back to Alyssa, who started the meeting, unless, Chris, you would prefer to take over now.
I'm good with
back to Alyssa. Okay, the scepter and crown go back to Alyssa.
However, momentarily.
Take us home, baby.
We have Dave Eastman with his hand up.
I just wanted to, maybe as the newest member, just say that it's been a pleasure to go through this year, and particularly for the reasons that June just articulated. And I wanted to add to that the civility of any. I know we have a lot of guest public members, 2 of which often speak, and I want to express the civility of our public as well. They ask thoughtful questions, request important things for discussion, and I think add value to the meetings, and that's not necessarily true with the public in public open meeting public situations. So, hands off to all the public that have come, those that remain silent and those that speak.
Thank you, Dave. I saw that, Ann Darling. David, thank you. As you were speaking, I was reminded of Star Wars and the tape that R2-D2 plays of Princess Leia. And for all I know, someday these NDCAP meetings will be footage like that some generations down the road discover and see, oh, that's what civility looked like, including the mindfulness of thanking the public for keeping it civil as well. So back to you, Alyssa. I think we're on meeting schedule for 2024.
Yes, we are. So, I'm going to I'm going to suggest that we do basically what we did last year, which was meet May, September, and December. Does that sound, just to get the ball rolling, is there any need to meet prior to that, Tony, in your opinion?
I can't think of anything right now. The only thing I would suggest is in the past 2 years, in any case, our May meeting, being that the date has been very close to the end of the legislature, that maybe we consider meeting a little bit later in May rather than the first week of May. But that's just a suggestion.
There's nothing compelling us to meet quarterly, is there? I mean, I think that
we're only obligated to meet 3 times a year now.
Okay. Does Chris have any feelings about this as the incoming chair?
I mean, let's not plan around the legislature, because heaven knows what they're going to be doing. Yeah, so I appreciate that, Tony. And let's see, when is Memorial Day?
April, May, Memorial Day is the 27th of May. So that's a Monday. The 27th is Memorial Day.
So I would suggest the 20th if folk are unopposed.
I'm sorry, Chris, you dropped out there. I didn't hear what you said.
I would suggest May 20th be our May meeting.
Okay.
May 20 would be the first meeting of 2024.
Right.
On a Monday at 6 p.m. And then the subsequent meeting, we talked about September.
And I know I am always busy, like through the first half of September. So I would suggest the 23rd or 30th. Unless Lessa wants to run that meeting.
That gets us, if we're doing September and then December, and we're doing the end of September, that gets those 2 meetings sort of close together.
Yeah.
Not and highly focused towards fall and winter, as opposed to there. I was wondering, maybe if rather than September, we could just do it the end of August, if that fits better with your schedule, Chris.
That whole period just tends to be full of meetings.
Okay.
But we can, if something happens, we'll always have a vice chair. So, Bill, you got your hand up.
Bill, you're mute.
I'm sorry to be late, but I was trying to get to my calendar. I'm out of town May 20th. The week before the 13th is okay with me. I don't know.
That seems fine.
I could do the 13th. That's fine.
Okay. Thank you.
So May 13, 2024 would be the first meeting of NDCAP for 2024. And now what's on the table is, instead of meeting in September, meeting the end of August. My only concern about that is that, many people do go on vacation at that time.
Yep.
Yeah.
I
would also offer that's the back to school period right near the end of August, beginning of September. That's why we typically slid into the middle of September or the week.
You guys have more experience. If things are fine, weighted towards the end of the year.
I'm not sure what, Bill, do you have another comment on September, or is that an old hand or is that a new hand?
I'm sorry, that's an old hand.
Okay.
Is there, Corey, is there anything in terms of significant completions that we want to schedule any of these meetings around?
Mm-hmm.
So what I would offer is we'll get a more rounded view of the progress throughout the summer with the reactor building work, if it's later in September, and then the timing in December, as we are right now, gives us an opportunity to look at the way the schedule firmed up for the work at the site and still wrap up the end of year reporting. So my recommendation is
okay,
9th, the 16th, and the 23rd of September, and then again on December 9th.
So I would recommend, for my schedule, I'd recommend the 23rd. I'm always busy that week of all those first 3 weeks.
So Monday, September 23rd. Is there any objections to putting that on the calendar? Hearing none, let's go with that. And then December 9th has been floated, which is, basically where we're at now. Sounds good to me.
Listen, the only thing I'll point out, I'm scrambling. I'm trying to find where the Waste Policy Committee meeting dates are. I just want to make sure that we don't have that December meeting the same date as the Waste Policy Committee meeting.
Right. Well, I think that the full panel takes precedence, and it's late now. So why don't we just schedule it for the 9th? And if we have to reschedule our Waste Policy Committee, that's not a problem.
The committee date is the 2nd.
It's what?
December 2nd.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Anne. You have
my little black book.
I do want to say that we are 4 down now in terms of panel seats, and it would be good to have those seats filled. So, we've talked about it in the past, but I'm thinking that it might be good to have some kind of public call for panel members for people who are interested to be citizen appointees potentially. I'm just putting that out there because I do think it's important. But we can discuss that at a later date. What's next on that was my general public comment or panel comment. So we have the 9th, December 9th, that would be 3 meetings for 2024. Tony will put those up on the website. Yeah. Any final general public comments to the panel before we close? Seeing none, I think that we can adjourn. Thank you, everyone, for being here and sticking with it. It's great.
I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
Discussion on the motion. Thank you all for the wonderful collegiality and convo this year, and I hope everybody has blessed and safe and peaceful holidays.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas to everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bless us.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
See you in the new year.